Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hi, my name is Burhanuddin Madani bin Ahmad Shukri, and I'm from class CS24033C. And the topic of my informative speech assignment that I'm about to share with you is called When Men Are Victims of Domestic Violence. Did you know that 1 in 7 men has been the victims of severe violence by an intimate partner in his lifetime? This is why the topic of male victims of domestic violence is important, because it is widely misunderstood and stigmatized issue that affects many individuals and also families. Despite the stereotypes and biases that exist, it is crucial that we support men who are victims of domestic violence and create a society where they feel safe and supported when seeking help. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of gender, and it can have a serious and long-lasting consequences for the survivors. However, men who experience domestic violence often face additional challenges in seeking help and support due to societal stereotypes and biases that point men as tough and dominant, while women as weak and vulnerable. Fear of stigma is a major barrier that prevents men from disclosing that they are victims of domestic violence. Men who experience domestic violence may feel ashamed, embarrassed, and stigmatized because of societal expectations of a masculinity that view men as strong and in control, and do not recognize the vulnerability and victimization that can come with domestic violence. In addition, there may be a perception that it is not manly to admit to being a victim, and that doing so will make them appear weak or emasculated. Furthermore, there is often a lack of understanding and awareness about domestic violence against men, which can lead to a disbelief or dismissal when men do disclose their experiences. Some people may assume that men cannot be victims of domestic violence, or that they must have done something to provoke the abuse. This can be incredibly isolating for male survivors who may feel like they have nowhere to turn for support. Changing the conversation around domestic violence is critical to creating a more inclusive and supportive dialogue that recognizes and supports male survivors. One way to do this is to shift the language and framing around domestic violence from one that is gender and binary to one that is more inclusive and recognizes that anyone can be a victim regardless of their gender. For example, instead of using language that assumes that women are the only victims and men are the only perpetrators, we can use gender-neutral terms such as survivor and abuser to describe the people involved. This helps to create a more inclusive conversation that recognizes the diversity of experiences and identities that can involve in the domestic violence. Another way to change the conversation is to acknowledge that domestic violence is not just a physical violence, but can also involve emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual abuse. By broadening our understanding of what domestic violence can look like, we can create a more nuanced conversation that recognizes the complexity and diversity of experiences involved. Access to resources is critical for male victims of domestic violence to be able to get help and support they need to heal and recover from their experiences. There are some resources that are available for male victims of domestic violence. Firstly, shelters. Many shelters and safe houses are available for male victims of domestic violence. These shelters provide a safe and supportive environment for men to stay while they seek help and support. They may also provide counseling, legal assistance, and other resources to help survivors rebuild their lives. Secondly, hotlines. There are also many hotlines that men can call for help and support. These hotlines are staffed by trained professionals who can provide emotional support, safety planning, and referrals to local resources. Thirdly, support groups. Support groups can be a helpful resource for men who are experiencing domestic violence. This group with others who have had similar experiences. They can provide a sense of community and validation as well as practical advice and support. Number 4 is counseling. Counseling can be an important resource for male survivors of domestic violence. It can provide a safe and supportive space to process and heal from trauma, as well as develop coping strategies and build resilience. And lastly, legal assistance. Male victims of domestic violence may also need legal assistance to protect themselves from this abuser, such as obtaining restraining orders or filing for divorce. Legal assistance can help survivors navigate the legal system and protect their rights. It's important to note while this resource exists, there may be additional barriers that prevent men from accessing them, such as fear of stigma or lack of awareness about available resources. In this speech, I have addressed the topic of male victims of domestic violence and the reactions of society when a man decides to tell someone that he is a victim of domestic violence. There are a few of the key points that I've made, such as: firstly, domestic violence is not just a woman's issue. Men can also be victims of domestic violence, and it is important to acknowledge and address this reality. Secondly, men who experience domestic violence may feel ashamed, embarrassed, or stigmatized, and may worry that others won't believe them. We need to work towards creating a culture of understanding and acceptance that recognizes the diversity of experiences and identities that can be involved in domestic violence. Thirdly, changing the language and framing around domestic violence can help create a more inclusive conversation that supports men as well as women. We need to move away from the stereotype that domestic violence is only something that happens to women, and instead recognize that anyone can be a victim of domestic violence regardless of gender. And then, resources are available for male victims of domestic violence, such as shelters, hotlines, support groups, counseling, and legal assistance. It is important to work towards ensuring that their resources are accessible and available for all survivors. So, in conclusion, it is crucial that we acknowledge and address the reality of male victims of domestic violence and work towards creating a culture of understanding and acceptance, and ensure that resources and support are accessible and available for all survivors. So that's all from me. Thank you very much and have a nice day.